are probably rushing into the comments saying that there is no point in what I'm doing, that I should let this guy go, that ultimately his video will not change anything in the YouTube scene nor affect me in any way, and Christ, why would I make this response several parts long? I imagine that you guys would prefer a regular video rather than drama. Maybe this is a good moment to say that I want this too. There is especially one video I really want to make, but I'm still waiting for Adam Feldman's response regarding the use of the Myrini's blood. Either he does not check his email address he provided on his website, or just has a life and doesn't give a fuck, so now I think that I will have to modify this script to not include excerpts from the Myrini's blood and just require reading it before watching the video and making some sort of short allusions to which passage I'm responding to. I'm sure you guys will read it for me, right? Right? And I want to say I'm very happy to see that my viewers stand by my side in this entire drama, and I especially want to give a shout out to this comment because this is the best compliment I could have ever received. I legit giggled to myself like a schoolgirl when I saw it. Now, I don't necessarily agree that all of Kevin's content is surface level drivel. Let's make this clear. It's not what made me smile. What made me happy was the idea that at least one person starts thinking more critically about the series thanks to me. Because this is the entire goal of this channel. This has been my intention since day one. The nature of fandoms is that they are indeed echo chambers where the characters get flattened and events of the story often twisted to fit things like ships or headcanons. But I've been in some fandoms in my life, and I think that A Song of Ice and Fire fandom is a particularly egregious example. These books are gigantic, with so many characters, mysteries and storylines that it's very difficult to comprehend them on your own. Part of the appeal are precisely those discussions or theories on various forums. So I don't hold it against most people that, at least at first, they may aid themselves with forums and popular videos to understand the story they've just read. That's normal, and I did so too. The problem arises when these theories and readings of frankly straightforward elements of the story become subjects of misconceptions. It's additionally amplified by the fact that we haven't had a new book in 12 years, and we also had the entire show in the process. So of course that will play a role in how this story is perceived as well. After 12 years of no new material, we started running in circles like headless chickens. Also, I feel like this bears repeating, the show is by no means canon, the ending of it will be different, and we only have 3 elements confirmed as happening in the books as well. Stannis burns Shireen, Hodor reveal, and King Bran. We might speculate how it's going to happen, but not whether it will happen. So we had a lot of time and factors that made those misconceptions cement themselves in the collective consciousness of the fandom and start being perceived as an actual element of the story. You know, Rhaegar left his wife and children at the mercy of Aerys and personally bears responsibility for their deaths. Or literally any take about Dany that is not written by a Dany extremist. So we are legit discussing these same things in circles, things that have not been confirmed or have no basis on the story, and it's legit like in those movies where a character has to relive the same day in a time loop. This channel is here to point out that many of those are blatantly wrong. It's part of the reason why most of my videos are so long. I make genuine effort to read the quotes out loud without cutting the context. It's also the reason why Hills Alive video is so long, because I read a lot of passages and include clips of her videos that are not taken out of context. I actually took the video about Hills Alive and cut quotes from the books, George's comments and her clips. Do you know how long this video would have been if I did that? 49 minutes from almost a feature-long video. It's a matter of being thorough. It's a matter of making my point as detailed and backed up by the text as possible. And this is why I had to make a firm stance against Kevin, because his response stood in opposition to everything I'm doing. He repeats commonly held misconceptions that I already dispelled numerous times. And you know, I have to continue doing this, even though there was a moment where I thought that there is no point in that. So remember the break I took during holidays? During this time I couldn't help but think about this channel and its future. I don't mind having a small following. I mean, I'm happy when I gain subscribers, but I like this little community that I've cultivated here, and I honestly don't know if I would be happy if I made it big, because I already feel like I carry a huge responsibility on my shoulders, and that responsibility grows with every person who clicks that subscribe button. I fear that once the channel grows into, say, thousands, I will just bail out. In any case, I thought, what's the point? No matter how many videos I make and how many misconceptions I dispel, they will be held by the fandom regardless. But I see that there absolutely is a point. For one, most of the A Song of Ice and Fire content creators rely on these misconceptions for their grift. The fact that 2 people already took offense in my very small presence here proves that to me. And I don't plan on making my videos shortened and less detailed, no matter how much I'm shamed for that. Because it's part of their appeal and literally works to my advantage, showing that I try to do justice to the complexity of the source material. I saw a few of Kevin's videos and he tends not to show too many quotes either. He mostly showed this weird telltale game. So, if at least one person is rethinking shit, and if at least one person is threatened by my presence here, then something good has been done, and it's not entirely in vain. Sorry for going on tangents, but I want you guys to understand why I'm doing this. And also because I'm petty and toxic. Never denied that. But let's say that's secondary.
And if you want to heap on high praise for her accomplishments, you need to criticize her harshly for her mistakes.
Hello darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
Daenerys is already the most harshly judged character in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, and perhaps all of literature altogether, criticized so harshly that people who have any sort of praise for her are labeled Daenerys Targaryen extremists. Seriously, you can't say a single good thing about her without prefacing it with, I know she's extremely flawed, makes a gargantuan amount of mistakes, and is going to end as an evil tyrant, but... And as you can see, Kevin is yet another person who does not feel like criticizing Daenerys from a genuine place, since he completely disregards the fact that she is explicitly referred to as having been sold, not just by herself but other characters as well, who throughout all of A Game of Thrones is repeatedly raped by her husband and has to use pillow tricks, aka getting raped, to gain some favors from him, such as allowing Viserys to ride again. Why would I listen to any criticism of someone for whom this very basic fact is a subject of negation? At this point, why would I listen to any criticism about Daenerys at all? Is any other character in need to be harshly criticized? Because I see people making their entire grift out of twisting Dany's character to the point that a completely different version of her exists in the fans' collective mind. I don't see the worst possible readings of other characters. I don't see them being called slavers, slave owners, colonizers, imperialists, white saviors, white supremacists, blood purists, tyrants, fascists, Nazis, racists, for whom the only fitting ending is committing the biggest war crime in universe and dying on a man's sword. Sorry, but no. There was a time when I begged for her to be considered as something more, but was rejected, and had to begrudgingly admit that yes, she is extremely super flawed and will definitely die, but these days are over. Enough is enough. Now I am a toxic Dany extremist. I am not willing to harshly criticize her, or, frankly, criticize her at all. If you want to see harsh criticism of her, open any popular A Song of Ice and Fire podcast, watch any video essayists, read any Quora response, open any Tumblr account, read any tweet. What's funny is that this is probably like the 7th time in the history of this channel, which is not even 1 year old, when I have to fight these worst fate readings of Dany's character. Other than that, I see these claims every day. Every day I see that she is a racist, black purist Nazi tyrant. Now, I have bothered no one for 8 months, and someone demands that I do it for the millionth time. And at this point I am tired. Why wouldn't I be? Would you not be? Would you not be an extremist of your favorite character if she was this twisted, this misunderstood, this hated, and reviled so viscerally?
The Lazarine village. And it's easy to overlook her mistakes. It's easy to look past the harm she is causing. Because she is a POV character. We are in her head. We see her compassion and empathy from her own point of view. We don't get to see what it's like to be on the receiving end of Daenerys Targaryen's kindness. But if you don't stop and step out of Daenerys' head and try to observe things with a wider lens, to try to see things as they really are and not just from her perspective, you're gonna miss a whole lot. Because if you just stay in her head, you are just vibing off the thoughts of good Queen Daenerys. You're just getting a high off of Daenerys' own perceptions of herself. You're literally chasing the dragon.
Why does Kevin act like we can't step out of Daenerys' head? We can. Let's do precisely that. Is it true? A freedwoman shouted. Is our mother dead? No, 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 Reznak screeched. Queen Daenerys will return to Meereen in her own time, in all her might and majesty. Until such time, his worship, King Hisdar, shall... He is no king of mine, a freedwoman yelled. Men began to shove at one another. Slaves grow our food, clean our streets, teach our young. They guard our walls, row our galleys, fight our battles. And now when they look east, they see this young queen shining from afar, this breaker of chains. The old blood cannot suffer that. Poor men hate her too. Even the vilest beggar stands higher than a slave. This dragon queen would rob him of that consolation. I told you before that I used a false name so the Lannisters would not know that I'd joined you. That was less than half of it, your grace. The truth is, I wanted to watch you for a time before pledging you my sword. To make certain that you were not my father's daughter. If she was not her father's daughter, who was she? Mad, he finished. But I see no taint in you. I am the queen's man still. Tomorrow, always, until my last breath, or hers. Barristan Selmy refused to believe that Daenerys Targaryen was dead. She laughed at him, said Pretty Marys. Daenerys never laughed. The rest of Meereen might see him as an amusing curiosity, like the exiled Summer Islander King Robert used to keep at King's Landing. But the queen had always spoken to him gently. We came too late, said Quentyn. I am no lady, the widow replied. Just Vugara's whore. You want to be gone from here before the tigers come. Should you reach your queen, give her a message from the slaves of old Volantis. She touched the faded scar upon her wrinkled cheek, where her tears had been cut away. Tell her we are waiting. Tell her to come soon.
Because if part of your epic hour-long video where you call out someone for criticizing Dany, in particular one part where they call out Dany for being a slave master, when the text tells us specifically she took slaves, how are you taking issue with that? How are you getting mad with someone addressing the text as it is? Hills Alive didn't make anything up. The text tells us Dany had slaves, she took slaves. What are you arguing with? Who are you arguing with?
Because we live in an era where it does not matter what happens in the text, the only thing that matters is what you want it to be. The headcanon industrial complex. But there is a big problem with something called functional illiteracy, which is being able to read but not comprehend what is being read. But I'm sure that Hills Alive doesn't care about it because she is on the side of slave owners. It's like Do you ever see someone act like they own the absolute shit out of you, but instead everyone looks at them like this? Yeah, this is how I feel right now. Because Kevin is undoubtedly American, and when he reads about someone being referred to as having been sold and needing to please her husband sexually to gain his respect and love, and later continue using pillow tricks at 14, he does not register this as sex slavery. But sure, my limited Eastern European brain does not possess functional literacy high enough to understand such complicated concepts. We don't even have electricity. We only know how to work in the fields as feudal serfs. It is only Americans who can read, we all know.
And you would think after this, Daenerys would never participate in slavery in such a way ever again. until she gets to Marine, where she allows people to sell themselves into slavery, and she takes 1/10 of the profit of that. How can you end slavery by allowing slavery? And this was not a cold, calculating, and cunning move. This was not Daenerys playing 4D chess, 4D Scythe by saying, I'm going to ruin the economy the slavers have by allowing people to sell themselves into slavery. No. That's not what Dany did. Dany, in the heat of the moment, made a rash decision because she wanted to make slavery into a form that's more acceptable to her. Just like here in the Lazarine village.
Finally, I can stop talking and just put a fragment of my video.
Daenerys is a slaver, slave owner, profits off of slavery.
There is a scene of Dany enacting attacks on those who choose to sell themselves back to slavery, and it's used as proof that she is a slaver. This tax is in fact proposed by an ex-slave Missandei, and it's absurd to argue that an ex-slave would advise Dany to become a slaver. Have you ever heard of punitive taxes? It's a tax that is there to punish one for something, as the name suggests, and the money does not go to Dany herself but to the city, and it's used to improve the lives of the freedmen. Someone actually tried to argue with me that Missandei actually proposed this tax as an elusive test of character, because apparently Missandei needs to additionally test Dany's character after she witnessed her liberatory campaign in Astapor. She can't be sure from that alone. But sure, my limited Eastern European brain does not possess thinking capabilities high enough to understand complicated concepts such as punitive taxes. I mean, we still travel using carriages. We only know how to die of famines. If someone in earnest argues that Daenerys, who was sold and is 14 when her owner dies, who was raped nightly by her owner to the point that she considered suicide, is in any way, shape or form a slave owner, he or she is a vile misogynist and a vile slavery apologist.
Because I had a lot of issues with Phoenix Ash's video, but what made me go, wait, hold on, hold the door, was when they took issue with Hills Alive for calling Mary Mazdor Dany's slave, for calling Dany a slave master. That's what Daenerys was. That's what the text makes very clear. How can you throw quote after quote after quote at somebody and then skip that part where it tells us they were slaves? How can you suggest that a victim cannot victimize others? My interpretation of what's going on here is that Hills Alive calling Dany a slave master, it hurts the ears of someone who is a staunch Dany defender, a Dany extremist.
And in the worst, Daenerys is burning her slave alive for something that she didn't even do.
Firstly, Miri is not Dany's slave, and Miri did not simply act out against her master, because Daenerys is not her master.
You sure about that?
But there is a big problem with something called. Further, Kevin still makes it clear that he does not understand that someone having to please her husband sexually to be respected is a slave, blah blah blah.
Phoenix Ashes disparages Hills Alive for being a white American whose ancestors may have owned slaves, yet Phoenix Ashes defends Daenerys Targaryen, a Valyrian whose ancestors were slavers. We know they own slaves. The hypocrisy is just not.
So Dany is evil for being ethnically Valyrian and having very distant ancestors from before 500 years who were slave owners, but she's also evil for trying to end slavery in whatever limited capacity she has as a 15-year-old and going against, among other things, a city that considered itself the spiritual ancestor of Valyria. I mean, okay, then I guess that we should apply this reasoning to every other character in Westeros and call them what they are. Settler colonists and genociders, but for some reason we don't do that. I wonder why. And before Kevin screams about whataboutism, I'm gonna say, I'm sorry, but whataboutism is the only way with you people, because you never direct such criticism at anyone else. Either start and stay consistent or leave Dany alone. By the way, Kevin, can you please answer me one question? If Dany is a slaver who profited off of slavery as recently as in A Dance with Dragons, why does the entire slaving elite of Essos hate her and want her dead, while the freedmen are nothing but utterly devoted to her? Sweet, Cavo laughed. If even half these stories coming back from Slavers Bay are true, this child is a monster. They say that she is bloodthirsty, that those who speak against her are impaled on spikes to die lingering deaths. They say she is a sorceress who feeds her dragons on the flesh of newborn babes, an oath breaker who mocks the gods, breaks truces, threatens envoys, and turns on those who have served her loyally. They say her lust cannot be sated, that she mates with men, women, eunuchs, even dogs and children, and woe betide the lover who fails to satisfy her. She gives her body to men to take their souls in thrall. Oh, good, thought Tyrion. If she gives her body to me, she is welcome to my soul, small and stunted though it is. They say, said Holden. By they, you mean the slavers, the exiles she drove from Astapor and Meereen, mere calumnies. I am no lady, the widow replied, just Vogara's whore. You want to be gone from here before the tigers come. Should you reach your queen, give her a message from the slaves of old Volantis. She touched the faded scar upon her wrinkled cheek, where her tears had been cut away. Tell her we are waiting. Tell her to come soon.
She has benefited from slavery herself. She will one day profit off the slave trade as Queen of Meereen. She will fill her war chest with gold from slavery. She will allow people to sell themselves as slaves.
These guys in Nessus are really dumb. Why do they send their fleets and untold number of soldiers against her if they could just waltz into the Great Pyramid and say, "Hey, we are so stupid, we did not realize that you are a slaver and a slave owner and slave master who benefits from slavery, let's ally instead"? Was someone crying about functional literacy?
But wait, Phoenix Ashes, aren't you white?
Oh my god, Karen.
No, but I'm serious. Phoenix Ashes, as someone who is white identifying and European, you might want to put that stone down. The house you live in is made of mirrored glass. But far be it from me to get in between two white people arguing over whose ancestors owned slaves and who didn't.
Let them fight.
Other Caucasians to the back. Immediately!
But since Phoenix Ashes wants to talk about the history of black people and slavery in America, let's get serious for a moment. Phoenix Ashes, a European white person, is using the real history of black slavery to defend a fictional white woman.
I still have every right to feel disgusted by the "boo-hoo, poor slavers didn't deserve to be crucified" bit, because 1. Millions of my people, including my great-grandfather, spent years working as slave laborers in the Third Reich. 2. I happen to know the etymology of the word Slav. Slavery is not something that is gone forever, and this is something I spoke about on this channel as well, for example about the slavery in Qatar. Besides, Valeria's slavery was not racialized. It was class-based, exactly like slavery in ancient Rome. It was the Giscari that you so fervently defend in the 163 video who taught Valerian slavery, and slavery in Essos remains class-based as well. So even if Dany was a slave owner or a slaver like you claim, proving that you don't know what a punitive tax is, and also proving that you're unable to realize that someone who is explicitly referred to as having been sold numerous times was a slave. And also that someone against whom the entire slaving elite fights is not a slaver. That wouldn't make her racist, and that wouldn't make my defense of her racist anyway. Even if you claim that she owned Miri, Miri's enslavement came from other ethnicity that is not white, the Dothraki. That the TV show decided to portray her as such stems from the fact that they filmed in Morocco and that the showrunners were racists who did not hire a sensitivity reader and wanted to do a show where the Confederacy won. But Kev, you seem to like these showrunners a lot.
And you call Dany a slave herself, but we'll talk about later why that's an inaccurate assessment of the character. The main thrust of Phoenix Ash's argument is that Daenerys has no power within her role as Khaleesi. Phoenix Ashes states that Dany is a 14-year-old bridal slave, and that was her only purpose. The title of Khaleesi is merely an honorific. It holds no true value. But this is not an accurate assessment of Daenerys or of the title of Khaleesi. A Khaleesi's power derives from her Khal, just so, but this is not so much different than how a queen consort's power derives from their king. In a Khalasar, the highest level of power is the Khal. The next level appears to be the Blood Riders. Following them, it is the Khaleesi.
Kevin Pendragon continues being functionally illiterate by being unable to realize that someone who is referred to as having been sold is in no position to refuse pleasing her husband sexually, and that she is dependent on his whims is a bridal slave. I will keep returning to that every time he makes this claim to really drive the point home. I feel really bad for George R. R. Martin and for the audience that he has. This is not even the subtext. It's just that nobody in Dany's immediate vicinity says, "Yes, Daenerys, you are a 14-year-old pregnant bridal slave." And even if someone said that, you would hear that Dany hallucinated it because she's an unreliable narrator. Wait a second. I just remembered another interesting passage. Jigui said the Blood Riders shared the Khal's wine, his tent, and even his wife's, though never his horses. A man's mount was his own. Daenerys was glad that Khal Drogo did not hold to those ancient ways. She should not have liked being shared. Look at the power Dany has. She is so powerful that if Drogo decided to let his Blood Riders gang rape her, she wouldn't be able to do anything about it. She is grateful for the fact that Drogo is kind enough not to let that happen. But here in this passage we see that this is the case in other Khalasars. So yes, in the Dothraki culture, a Khaleesi is literally nothing more than a sex doll. And remember, Kevin did not realize that Dany has been sold and thinks that her being 14 does not matter in the slightest. Wait, what the hell is this?
She also calls them centuries of peace and prosperity, which they very clearly and objectively were not. Westeros has never been particularly peaceful, but it's also never been as chaotic as it was during the reign of the Targaryens.
The Seven Kingdoms of Westeros have been at constant war with one another. Hardly a year passed without some of them being at war. Aegon's chief concern was peace. Before the conquest, wars between the realms of Westeros were common. Hardly a year passed without someone fighting someone somewhere. Even in those kingdoms said to be at peace, neighboring lords oft settled their disputes at sword point. Aegon's accession put an end to much of that. Jaehaerys gave the kingdom 60 years of prosperity, which is a significant portion of the entire Targaryen rule. The accomplishments of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen were almost too many to enumerate. Chief among them, in the point of view of most students of history, are the long periods of peace and prosperity that mark his time upon the Iron Throne.
Just before Dany brings dragons back into the world, she makes a speech to the followers that she has left. And interestingly, when she's lauding her Targaryen heritage, she mentions that she's the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel. Now, clearly the fact that she's referencing Maegor the Cruel of all people doesn't seem like a great sign of what's to come. But after further consideration, the fact that she mentions Aegon and Maegor and no one else is incredibly strange.
Daenerys does bring up Maegor the Cruel, but in a different situation. She does this when she learns about the fact that Eroe, a Lazaran girl she promised herself to protect, was gang raped by the Dothraki and then killed by Mago. Dany promises herself that she will avenge Eroe. "It was her fate, Khaleesi," said Aggo. "If I look back, I am lost." "It was a cruel fate," Dany said, "yet not so cruel as Mago's will be. I promise you that, by the old gods and the new, by the Lamb God and the Horse God and every other god that lives, I swear it by the Mother of Mountains and the Womb of the World, before I am done with them, Mago and Kojako will plead for the mercy they showed Eroe." The Dothraki exchanged uncertain glances. "Khaleesi," the handmaid Iri explained, as if to a child. "Jaqo is a Khal now, with 20,000 riders at his back." She lifted her head. "And I am Daenerys Stormborn, Daenerys of House Targaryen, of the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel, and old Valyria before them. I am the dragon's daughter, and I swear to you, these men will die screaming."
I watched the entirety of Phoenix Ash's video, wondering if perhaps I missed something in regards to Hills Alive. I've yet to see her lie on purpose or lie by omission. By the end of Phoenix Ash's video, I was not at all convinced.
I have an amazing idea. Why don't we go on another tangent? Let's discuss Kevin's severe misunderstanding of what it means to have power. Kevin reduces it to something completely abstract, as in someone has power because they hold a certain position and not because a certain position gives them resources in which they can exercise said power. A president of a country does not have power solely because he's the president of a country. He has it because, as a leader of that state, he is entrusted with overseeing things like the police and the military. Via those, he can enforce his will on his own people or others. Drogo has power because he is the leader of the Kalasar, so a king in a way, and as such, has people under his command that enforce his will. We also know that Dothraki follows strength, which helps explain why Drogo, a warrior so strong, has so many followers. If Drogo decides that they invade the village, he has power to do that because he has enough people following him and being loyal to him for it to happen. Does Dany have an army that will enforce her will specifically? No, of course she does not. The army raids the Lazarin village because Drogo decided to invade Westeros, and that only because the life of his son has been threatened. Before, when Dany was asking him to do that, he kept refusing and was disinterested. Does Dany have a family that could enforce any will that she might have via their armies? No, of course not. At this point, even Viserys is dead. This is Drogo's army and he decides what happens. He can at any point decide to change his mind. Dany has no army on her own, and very few people to protect and defend her, which ends with terrible things as we see later in the story. The Dothraki would never in earnest follow Dany at that stage of the story because she is a 14-year-old pregnant girl, the very antithesis of strength. Koto literally says that if Drogo dies, Dany becomes nothing. Like, how much more obvious does it have to be for you? Imagine a scenario. Dany tries to claim the Lazarin women, and instead of accepting her decision, Drogo gets mad and says, "You went too far, bitch, and you need to be punished." Where is Dany's power now? And yeah, the Queen consorts in A Song of Ice and Fire, known for having so much power. Relations between Aerys and his queen had been strained during the last years of his reign. They slept apart and did their best to avoid each other during the waking hours. But whenever Aerys gave a man to the flames, Queen Rhaella would have a visitor in the night. The day he burned his mace and dagger hand, Jaime and Jon Darry had stood at guard outside her bedchamber, Willis the King took his pleasure. "You're hurting me," they had heard Rhaella cry through the oaken door. "You're hurting me." In some queer way, that had been worse than Lord Chester's screaming. "We are sworn to protect her as well," Jaime had finally been driven to say. "We are," Darry allowed. "But not from him." I personally don't think there's enough info on Rhaella to in earnest compare her situation to Dany, but we have another queen consort with whom we can do exactly that. Alicent in the show. Granted, House of the Dragon is very inconsistent with how much power does the girl actually have over the course of the series, but we know enough about her story to be able to make the comparison in earnest. At the moment of her introduction in the story, Daenerys Targaryen is 13 years old, is an exiled princess with only her abusive brother as her protector, who spent her entire life in fear. Even though she is highborn, she would often go hungry and had no stable place to live in. She was essentially homeless and received no formal education. At the moment of her introduction in the story, Alicent Hightower is 14 years old. She arrived at court alongside her father, who holds the position of the second most powerful man in all of the kingdom. She is a highborn lady who grew in comfort and privilege. She never went hungry, had a place to live and a family to love and raise her. She also received formal education. Now she resides at court. Daenerys Targaryen is sold by Illyrio and Viserys to Khal Drogo, a man in his late 20s, leader of a nomadic tribe who does not even speak her language. This is explicitly confirmed to have been a matter of purchase. Daenerys is repeatedly martially raped by him to the point that she wants to commit suicide. Alicent Hightower is pimped out by her father to Viserys, a man in his mid to late 40s, to further Otto's and his family's own standing and seat his future grandson on the Iron Throne. Alicent is repeatedly martially raped by him. Daenerys continues to only have an older brother, who dies after he tries to kill her and her child. She still has no armies that would fight in her own name. She has to resort to sexual favors for her husband to have an ounce of respect for her and do things as small as letting her brother join them at the head of the column. Alicent, though facing hardships, grows more and more accustomed to the role of queen consort, and when she decides to follow her father's plans, she is firmly supported by her house. As an adult, Alicent sits on the small council and can order Rhaenyra around. When Viserys gets seriously sick, she sits on his spot in the small council and is essentially his regent, as confirmed by Vaemond.
But it's not a king who sits the Iron Throne these days, good sister. It's a queen.
When Drogo's life gets endangered, Dany realizes that hers would be compromised as well, and Drogo's Khalasar does not make it a secret that she's nothing without him. The only protection she has is Jorah and 4 teenagers. When Drogo is as good as dead, she is abandoned by almost all of his men, the women she tried to protect are gang raped, and she is left with nothing. When Viserys dies, Alicent still sits on the Green Council. She still has power as Viserys' regent until Aegon is formally crowned. She still holds authority as Dowager Queen and will presumably continue to do so. Daenerys is content with her life in the Khalasar and would have liked to continue it forever. However, she believes that after the death of her brother, as a last Targaryen, she needs to reclaim the throne. She tries to convince her husband to invade, but he refuses. After an assassination attempt on her, her husband decides to relent as revenge for trying to harm his unborn son. In order to finance this endeavor, Drogon invites a Lazarin village, and Dany, 14 and heavily pregnant at this point, at first tries to rationalize the violence around her, but then tries, as best as she can, to extend her protection over exploited women. For that, she is betrayed by one of them, has a horrifically painful stillbirth, is rendered infertile forever, her husband is resurrected comatose, and the girls she tried to protect are gang raped and murdered. Alicent and her father act as regent for Viserys and expand their influence in the Red Keep solely because they plan to place Aegon on the throne, merely due to their own ambitions, even though the king's will is for Rhaenyra to succeed him. Alicent receives information that her son raped a maid. While she offers the girl surface-level sympathy, immediately afterwards she threatens her into silence, pays her off, and coerces her into drinking moon tea, making sure she drinks till the last drop. It's heavily implied that it's not the first time he did something of this sort. As Queen Regent, Alicent can, and honestly should, send Diana away from the Red Keep, do not endanger her further, and find her employment elsewhere, for example in Old Town. She has infinite power to punish her son as well. She can force him to spend time in a monastery for a year, like Saera Targaryen was for the crime of having an orgy. She can force him to scrub latrines. She can punish him however she wants. Instead, she conceals the entire fiasco with intimidation and proceeds with plans to literally crown him, making him have unlimited power and access to however many serving girls he can rape as he pleases. Both are highborn. Both were married off as children against their will and were subjected to sexual violence for the sake of someone else's ambitions. Both are what you would call consorts of their husbands. Yet only one has some semblance of power in her own right, Alicent. Yes, her access to power is via Viserys and she wouldn't have it if she wasn't pimped out to him, but she's not entirely isolated either, like Daenerys is. Her house stands with her, and it is Alicent who rules the realm as regent when Viserys becomes too sick. When Viserys dies, Alicent's position is not endangered. She still holds power and authority. Drogo and Viserys are both rapist pedophiles, but it does not change the fact that Viserys respects Alicent's authority far more than Drogo ever respected Daenerys. In the case of Alicent, her marriage allows her access to far more power than Dany ever had, and she is not and has never been as profoundly isolated as Daenerys. Moreover, both women are witnesses to sexual violence, yet one tries to help its victims in the extremely limited capacity that she has and is violently punished for it, while the other intimidates the victim into silence and proceeds to empower her rapist. Leaks for Season 2 of House of the Dragon show that the actress who played Diana is going to have a recurring role and as such may be involved in Blood and Cheese. The same people who cheer for Miri for murdering an innocent child as her revenge already want to tear Diana apart for her getting similar revenge on her rapist. The same people who say that 14-year-old, pregnant and vulnerable Dany owned Miri as a slave never once make a comment about power dynamics between Diana, a low-born girl, and Alicent, queen consort and currently regent of the entire continent. The same people who consider Dany a naive, stupid child for trying to save the women in the Lazar, in whatever limited capacity she has, ignore that Alicent coerced Diana into silence and did not punish her son and even praise her for the surface-level compassion she's shown to Diana. Alicent is a 37-year-old Queen Regent. Dany is a 14-year-old bridal slave. Now, let's reverse the situation. Alicent instead takes Diana into her protection, punishes Aegon in some more substantial way, but Diana still participates in Blood and Cheese, and Alicent executes her for it. You guys wouldn't have a problem. You would say that it was deserved. You would say that it was deserved for murder of little children, and that Diana being a victim of rape is irrelevant. You guys would insist that Diana deserved to be disemboweled before she was executed. Now, let's imagine that Miri escapes her captors and tries to run to another village to warn others of Drogo. Instead, Dany catches her and intimidates her into silence, says that if she tries to, she will be harshly punished. You guys would literally have a field day with your Mad Queen metas. And before Kevin throws a temper tantrum that he does not personally think that, I don't care. He doesn't have to for the people who hold the same position as him to think that. He doesn't have to for the people he associates with to hold these positions. And before Kevin throws a temper tantrum about whataboutism, I said it already. Whataboutism is literally the only way for you people to realize what you're saying, to realize the double standard you're applying to Daenerys.
Some Khals share their spouses with their blood riders. Drogo was not of that type. In Drogo's case, he seemed to actually be in love with Daenerys, his wife, the moon of his life. When Daenerys decided in the Lazarine village to stop all the Drogo supported her decision, ignoring his other riders. This demonstrates a Khaleesi can wield great influence. Now, does that mean I don't think Drogo has never forced himself on Daenerys because she was Khaleesi and the Khaleesi can't be harmed in that way? No, only an actual idiot would think I'm suggesting that. What I am pointing out is that Khaleesi's are not slaves to their Khals, not even 14-year-old Daenerys, who was given to Drogo by Viserys for the price of an army. Khaleesi's are not slaves to their Khals, not even 14-year-old Daenerys, who was given to Drogo by Viserys for the price of an army. Khaleesi's are not slaves to their Khals, not even 14-year-old Daenerys, who was given to Drogo by Viserys for the price of an army. In fact, Viserys begins to resent Daenerys as her power within the Khalasar grows. More on this in a bit. Drogo's decision to support Dany doesn't come from the sexual favors she provides for him. There was one instance where Dany had to use sex to convince Drogo to change his mind about something, when she desperately wants Drogo to give Viserys a horse again. But we're not led to believe this is how she always tries to get Drogo to do what she wants. At this point of the story, Daenerys and Drogo are calling each other nicknames inspired by Dothraki legend. She is trying to learn his language, and he is trying to learn hers.
Look at Drogo, such a good benevolent husband for not allowing his blood riders to gang rape her. And a 20-year-old man in love with his 14-year-old bride that was sold to him. Like, Kevin, you say she's 14! Don't you see how sick this is? Drogo hasn't forced himself onto Dany a few times. Every time he does, he's raping her, because as a 14-year-old, she cannot consent to him, because she's a child! Everyone, remember this very well. Kevin Pendragon says that Drogo is in earnest in love with 14-year-old Daenerys. Remember that. And yeah, Drogo might have supported her actions there specifically, but what if he didn't? What if he gets mad at her? What if he decides to punish her to not lose face in front of the rest of the Dothraki? He can do whatever he wants with her, he can kill her, he can let his blood riders rape her. What if she grows up, Rhaego is born, and all of a sudden he decides, you know what? I'm bored of you. I want a new 13-year-old to rape. I will take a new wife. Meanwhile, blood riders, take her and do whatever you want with her. I don't care anymore.
This could indicate Dany is falling in love with Drogo and vice versa. Phoenix Ashes, however, insist throughout their video what Dany suffers from is not love, but Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm not going to address Phoenix Ashes' claims about Daenerys having Stockholm Syndrome because I don't need to. That's not necessary for me to prove that Daenerys once had the power to own slaves. But I will say this. If you look at Dany and Drogo's relationship late in Book 1 and you can't believe she's calling him sweet nicknames and admiring his body and his long braided hair, you can't possibly believe she loves him and would literally die for him. You think this behavior is so abnormal, she must be suffering from some sort of mental trauma because that's the only excuse for her actions. Dany would never love a slaver or a... So you write off her behavior as some sort of trauma response. Let me suggest to you, then maybe you don't actually like Daenerys Targaryen.
I'm out of words. I'm halfway through this video and I'm out of words. And I'm rarely out of words. See, now it makes perfect sense. Literally perfect sense. He has to argue that at 14, Dany can be judged as if she was 30. Because he had not, at any point, seen her as a child. Not when she sold and raped at 13. Not when she was being raped every night by Drogo. Not when she was pregnant with his child at 14. I don't want to continue doing this. I don't want to continue writing this script. Kevin Pendragon, you are beyond help. And worse yet, what you say is not at all uncommon in this fandom. I'm very sorry to the male members of my audience, but with each passing day, I'm convinced that men should start in jail and prove their way out. If I was Hills alive, I would be outraged if someone like this was defending me. If I was Hills alive, I would do everything to distance myself from Kevin Pendragon. I know that she says that Dany being a victim of child sexual abuse makes her evil, but I don't think even she would deny that she was its victim altogether. Unfortunately, it looks like Hills alive does not necessarily want to distance herself from him. For now, let's listen to what he's saying once again, clearly.
At this point of the story, Daenerys and Drogo are calling each other nicknames inspired by Dothraki legend. She is trying to learn his language, and he is trying to learn hers. This could indicate Dany is falling in love with Drogo and vice versa. Phoenix Ashes, however, insist throughout their video what Dany suffers from is not love, but Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm not going to address Phoenix Ashes' claims about Daenerys having Stockholm Syndrome because I don't need to. That's not necessary for me to prove that Daenerys once had the power to own slaves. But I will say this. If you look at Dany and Drogo's relationship late in Book 1 and you can't believe she's calling him sweet nicknames and admiring his body and his long braided hair, you can't possibly believe she loves him and would literally die for him. You think this behavior is so abnormal, she must be suffering from some sort of mental trauma because that's the only excuse for her actions. Dany would never love a slaver or a... So you write off her behavior as some sort of trauma response. Let me suggest to you, then maybe you don't actually like Daenerys Targaryen.
And then, in case you want to delete or private your video, Kevin, I made copies on my Google Drive, hard drive, and external drive to be sure that this video never once disappears.
This could indicate Dany is falling in love with Drogo and vice versa. Phoenix Ashes, however, insist throughout their video what Dany suffers from is not love, but Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm not going to address Phoenix Ashes' claims about Daenerys having Stockholm Syndrome because I don't need to. That's not necessary for me to prove that Daenerys once had the power to own slaves. But I will say this. If you look at Dany and Drogo's relationship late in book 1, and you can't believe she's calling him sweet nicknames and admiring his body and his long braided hair, you can't possibly believe she loves him and would literally die for him. You think this behavior is so abnormal, she must be suffering from some sort of mental trauma, because that's the only excuse for her actions. Dany would never love a slaver or a... So you write off her behavior as some sort of trauma response. Let me suggest to you, then maybe you don't actually like Daenerys Targaryen.
Discovery Houston, we're still looking at it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, enter test. Houston, contact with a test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice to be in orbit.
I find it incredible that you keep repeating claims about Dany's unreliability like 50-11 times so that your arguments can hold any water, and they still don't, but cannot apply said unreliability to the way Dany sees her relationship with Drogo. The things she says about him are outright disturbing. First, that he brutally, anally rapes her every night, that in order to gain his respect and love, she has to sexually seduce him, that she's grateful that he did not decide to let his blood riders gang rape her. All at 14. Daenerys has only known abuse and disrespect, so someone treating her slightly better than Viserys did is enough to convince her that she's being loved and genuinely respected. That's how the brain of an abuse victim operates. After abuse is all you know, and after you convince yourself that your abuser loves you, every abuse will seem like love to you. Because you don't know anything else.
When Daenerys decided in the Lazarine village to stop all the... Some men argued, some men fought and died, but these men did not ignore the order of the Khaleesi because the Khaleesi has power. Power over the people within the Khalasar. Power that Phoenix Ashes either is willfully ignoring or is ignorant of. Quote, "Wait here," Dany told Ser Jorah. "Tell them all to stay. Tell them I command it." The knight smiled. Ser Jorah was not a handsome man. He had a neck and shoulders like a bull, and coarse black hair covered his arms and chest so thickly that there was none left for his head. Yet his smiles gave Dany comfort. "You are learning to talk like a queen, Daenerys." "Not a queen," said Dany. "A Khaleesi." She wheeled her horse about and galloped down the ridge alone. End quote. Daenerys as Khaleesi had the power to halt the Khalasar, or a portion thereof, without needing to ask Drogo for his permission to do so. If she had no power, she could not do this. If she had no agency, as Phoenix Ashes also asserts in their video, Dany would not dare to do this. Dany is neither as weak or as helpless as many of her defenders would make her out to be. If she was, she would have died on the Dothraki Sea like Magister Illyrio Mopatis predicted. There is that great moment after Dany halts the Khalasar and Viserys rides up angry only to be strangled by a whip from one of Dany's protectors. Ser Jorah and the rest of the Dothraki wait for Dany's orders to know what to do next with Viserys. In that moment, Dany was the most powerful person in the group. And this is before Doria and her lessons on pillow tricks. The role of Khaleesi is one of privilege within the Khalasar. It is not the role of a glorified sex slave. Again, that is not to say a Khaleesi can't be treated as such, but that's not what a Khaleesi is meant to be. And it would be inaccurate to suggest Daenerys had no power in that role. Daenerys reflects on this in one of her earlier chapters in the first book. Quote, "The day was warm and cloudless, the sky a deep blue. When the wind blew, she could smell the rich scents of grass and earth. As her litter passed beneath the stolen monument, she went from sunlight to shadow and back again. Dany swayed along, studying the faces of dead heroes and forgotten kings. She wondered if the gods of burned cities could still answer prayers. If I were not blood of the dragon, she thought wistfully, this could be my home. She was Khaleesi. She had a strong man and a swift horse, handmaids to serve her, warriors to keep her close, an honored place in the Dosh Khaleen awaiting her when she grew old, and in her womb grew a son who would one day bestride the world. That should be enough for any woman, but not for the dragon. With Viserys gone, Daenerys was the last, the very last. She was the seed of kings and conquerors, and so too the child inside her. She must not forget." End quote. But I'm guessing this is the Stockholm Syndrome kicking in. I'm convinced these people don't actually like Daenerys at all, because they do not accept her for who she is, but we'll move past it. Phoenix Ashes calls Daenerys a slave, but this is not an accurate assessment. Daenerys is not a slave. If anything, she is a subject, one that lives under the rule of Khal Drogo. She holds a place in the Khalasar like the Khos, the Khas, and the Blood Riders, and other free members of the group. She is an honorary Dothraki made so by marriage. Of all the times Daenerys thinks of the slaves that are part of Drogo's Khalasar, she never, not even once, counts herself among them.
I find it interesting that for a good portion of the time, Kevin shows this particular still from the not canon show, where in the books she never says anything close to "I am Khaleesi, I do command you." This is undoubtedly intentional manipulation on his part, since this is not how this conversation went in the books. This one is Mago, who writes in the cast of Col Jacko. He says the Khaleesi has taken his spoils, a daughter of the lambs who was his to mount. Khal Drogo's face was still and hard, but his black eyes were curious as they went to Dany. "Tell me the truth of this, moon of my life," he commanded in Dothraki. Dany told him what she had done in his own tongue so the Khal would understand her better. Her words simple and direct. When she was done, Drogo was frowning. "This is the way of war. These women are our slaves now, to do with as we please. It pleases me to hold them safe," Dany said, wondering if she had dared too much. "If your warriors would mount these women, let them take them gently and keep them for wives. Give them places in the Khalasar and let them bear you sons." Koto was ever the cruelest of the Blood Riders. It was he who laughed. "Does the horse breed with sheep?" Something in his tone reminded her of Viserys. Dany turned on him angrily. "The dragon feeds on horse and sheep alike." At no point does Dany give commands. She needs to ask Drogo for permission to save the women from rapes, and Koto mocks her. She even fears that she went too far. Later, Sam Koto says it directly. "No? You say me no? Better you should pray that we do not stake you out beside your Maegi. You did this as much as the other." Ser Jorah stepped between them, loosening his longsword in its scabbard. "Rein in your tongue, Blood Rider. The princess is still your Khaleesi. Only while the blood of my blood still lives," Koto told the knight. "When he dies, she is nothing." Dany felt a tightness inside her. "Before I was Khaleesi, I was the blood of the dragon. Ser Jorah, summon my Khas." "No," said Koto. "We will go. For now." Khaleesi. Hago followed him from the tent, scowling. "We've seen these quotes already, but they still didn't pierce his thick skull, so I will continue repeating them." Not only that, but in the same chapter that Kevin himself quotes, you can see just how little influence Dany has over Drogo. She can order the Khalasar to stop for a short while, but not to direct where it goes, nor what it does. The Khal's mouth twisted in a frown beneath the drop of his long mustachio. The stallion who mounts the world has no need of iron chairs. Dani propped herself on an elbow to look at him, so tall and magnificent. She loved his hair especially. It had never been cut. He had never known defeat. It is prophesied that the stallion will ride to the ends of the earth, she said. The earth ends at the Black Salt Sea, Drogo answered at once. He wet a cloth in a basin of warm water to wipe the sweat and oil from his skin. No horse can cross the poison water. In the free cities, there are ships by the thousand, Dani told him, as she had told him before. Wooden horses with 100 legs. They fly across the sea on wings full of wind. Khal Drogo did not want to hear it. We will speak no more of wooden horses and iron chairs. He dropped the cloth and began to dress. This day I will go to the grass and hunt, woman-wife, he announced as he strapped into a painted vest and buckled on a white belt with heavy medallions of silver, gold and bronze. Yes, my sun and stars, Dani said. Drogo would take his blood riders and ride in search of Rakkar, the great white lion of the plains. If they returned triumphant, her lord husband's joy would be fierce, and he might be willing to hear her out. Do you think that it's a coincidence that this conversation happens right after he rapes her? Is it solely because George R.R. Martin is a pervert? No. If you were able to read beyond the words, if you saw the subtext and connected the dots, it's clear that she tries pillow tricks again to convince him to go to Westeros. It's also not the first time they are having this conversation. Moreover, Kevin once more shows his profound misunderstanding of how power operates. Because the entire dynamic between Drogo and Daenerys hinges on her being available to him for sex and reproduction, her a 14-year-old girl. And I know he doesn't care that she's an 8th grader, because he also made it clear that he does not perceive her as a child, but as an adult woman. Whatever limited influence Dani has on Drogo hinges on her obeying him, performing her so-called wifely duties, aka getting fucking raped, after she has been sold, no less. And you picking apart her singular orders will not change that. You cherry-picking words and expression and manipulating your audience by showing stills from the show that do not matter because we discussed the books will not ever change that. And notice how Dani, even when she's a powerful Khaleesi, is still a victim of Viserys' abuse. He's still allowed to lay violent hands on her. Even when she is a powerful queen consort, Viserys wants to abuse her. In A Dance with Dragons, there is a character who appears very briefly, the Widow of the Waterfront. This is her story. The Widow of the Waterfront. East of the Rhine, they still call her Vogaro's whore, though never to her face. The dwarf was not enlightened, and Vogaro was an elephant, 7 times a triarch, very rich, a power on the docks. While his other men built the ships and sailed them, he built piers and storehouses, brokered cargoes, changed money, insured ship owners against the hazards of the sea. He dealt in slaves as well. When he grew besotted with one of them, a bad slave trained at Yunkai in the way of 7 sides, it was a great scandal, and a greater scandal when he freed her and took her for his wife. After he died, she carried on his ventures. No freedman might dwell within the Black Wall, so she was compelled to sell Vogaro's mans. She took up residence at the merchant's house. That was 32 years ago, and she remains here to this day. I am no lady, but even Vogaro's whore knows the taste of falsehoods. I am no lady, the widow replied, just Vogaro's whore. I bring up the widow because the entire scene where she appears contains some very interesting passages. For example, how half the world wants Daenerys dead, just like half the fandom, but also because she was in a position similar to Dani. She was a bad slave, Vogaro owned her, he was infatuated with her, then he freed her and married her. Nonetheless, all these years afterwards, even after Vogaro is long dead, she is still called Vogaro's whore. And not only that, she still calls herself that. Even after she was freed, she recognized herself as his slave. And after having been sold, Dani was never freed. Drogo never said, "Hey, now that I love you, I will no longer consider you my slave." Vogaro did that, Drogo did not. And Dani and others consider her to have been sold. A fact that Kevin curiously omitted up to this point. I know that she spent her childhood in exile, impoverished, living on dreams and schemes, running from one city to the next, always fearful, never safe, friendless but for a brother who was by all accounts half mad. A brother who sold her maidenhood to the Dothraki for the promise of an army. And before Kevin scrambles to point out this quote, if truth be told, I did not think Daenerys would survive for long amongst the Horse Lords. That did not stop you from selling her to Khal Drogo. The Dothraki neither buy nor sell. Say rather that her brother Viserys gave her to Drogo to win the Cold's friendship. This is solely because the Dothraki do not have a concept of buying and selling in their culture. They are not merchants, they have no currency. The Dothraki only give and receive slaves as gifts, but they are still slaves in the eyes of both their owners and Dothraki. They were slaves, a gift from one of Magister's many Dothraki friends. There was no slavery in the free city of Pentos. Nonetheless, they were slaves. Still in A Game of Thrones, Jorah says, "Yes, Khaleesi, but the Dothraki look on these things differently than we do in the West. I have told them as much as Illyrio told him, but your brother does not listen. The Horse Lords are no traders. Viserys thinks he sold you, but now he wants his price. Yet Khal Drogo would say he had you as a gift. He will give Viserys a gift in return, yes, in his own time. You do not demand a gift, not of a Khal. You do not demand anything of a Khal." How much more obvious does it have to be for you? And these women who serve Dany in Pentos are slaves, even though slavery is outlawed there. How much more obvious does it have to be for you? I ask once more, why would I not call myself a Daenerys extremist? Which other character inspires vitriol that borders on apologizing for rape and pedophilia? Only one child bride in the series is explicitly referred to as having been sold, and only in her case it's not a metaphor. At the same time, only her is constantly said to have power in a relationship with a man she was sold to, and only one is denied to be a child bride altogether. Kevin makes it very clear in his video that he thinks that, in the case of Daenerys, age cannot be an explanation for any of her actions and does not factor into power dynamics in the slightest. Same people who are writing call-out posts for me for not giving a fuck that 37-year-old Shaw Alicent was once a child bride have no problems saying such vile shit about Dany. You can't criticize Alicent for whatever she does because she was a child bride once, but you can absolutely crucify a 14-year-old pregnant girl who a year prior was suicidal from being brutally raped every night for trying to save other women from rape. And let's be honest, why does this fandom act like Dany did something wrong or that her actions did not matter? Because every time these scenes are discussed, people act as if Dany committed some sort of a crime for thinking she is doing something good in Lazar, but they act as if this was a moral failing of some sort. But she was objectively doing something good, and even Kevin cannot fully deny that, however limited that was. They point out to Miri saying that life does not matter after everything else is gone. Okay, so she should have just let these women be raped and then killed or sold? Because they really make it seem like that. Daenerys is the only character to ever extend her compassion towards collateral victims of war, since she herself was a collateral in the schemes of Illyrio and Varys, and she's made into a devil because of it. A normal fandom would realize that Dany thinking this is the price of the Iron Throne, and then immediately changing her mind and using that very limited power she had to extend her protection for some women is indicative of something good about her. Other characters, infinitely more powerful than Dany was in that specific moment, would have closed their eyes or straight up not care what is happening. But instead they focus on technicalities, on whether she should in earnest be called a slave owner. According to them, yes she can, and that's the only thing that matters in this situation anyway. But no, they honestly act like Dany stopping Miri from being raped is a crime, or that at the very least, that did not matter at all, because she would get sold in Slaver's Bay anyway, and that she only did this so that her chattel is treated nicely before they're passed further. The implication here couldn't have been clearer. This stupid naive bitch shouldn't have done anything because, in the position that she is in, she literally cannot free these women instantly, immediately rebuild their homes, erase their memories so that they're no longer traumatized by rape, and also immediately end slavery and feudalism and introduce democracy, right at this very moment. Every single argument about Dany boils down to precisely this. She is not immediately offering and implementing perfect solutions, and that proves she's evil, immoral, unfit to rule, and should die, preferably via femicide, as punishment for some atrocity. This is yet another reason why I believe George is not finishing these books. His audience, however much they try to insist otherwise, want easy stories, easy solutions, easy answers. They want evil shrieking queens killed by righteous kings who then ruled wisely. Fact for the matter is, nobody in the fandom but us pesky extremists recognizes Daenerys for who she is, a child who tries to do something good, but is not always choosing the best options or succeeding because she is a child who was never even formally educated. For everyone else, she is not only an adult woman, but also an adult, experienced woman who has power to snap her fingers and immediately solve every issue in the world, but intentionally withholds it and prefers to instead cause damage just for shits and giggles. Let's say it plainly. To Kevin Pendragon and the rest of the grifters, Daenerys Targaryen, a girl who was 13 when she was sold and repeatedly raped, to the point of being suicidal, is only worthy of to, at 16, go crazy due to her dad's genes, intentionally carpet bomb a city, and die skewered on a man's sword. Let's call it what it is. Let's state things plainly. And let's continue to fight against with. End of part 2.